Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Welcome to Creepy Confidential. I'm your host, Noelle, your resident weirdo Wisconsinite. I open case files on cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and otherworldly creepy, bringing you new cases, live broadcasts, and local lore. So get ready, creeps. It's Creepy Confidential. Today, Creepy Confidential is welcoming Brenda of Horrifying History. Brenda and I are joining forces during this Creeptober season to bring you the tale of two corpse brides. So I'd like you to give a creepy hand for the wonderful, fabulous Brenda of Horrifying History. Take it away, Brenda.
My name is Brenda, and I'm the creator and host of the podcast Horrifying History. Are you into the dark side of history? Horrifying History tells you about the side of history that people don't normally talk about. We tell the tales of haunted places, infamous true crimes, the paranormal, unsolved mysteries, and then we look to history to see where the truth actually lies. Today, I want to tell you a little story about a bridal store in Mexico. For many, going shopping for a wedding dress is a very exciting time. It's here that many brides start to feel like their special day is almost here. But in one bridal shop in Chihuahua, Mexico, brides get an extra special bonus, a dead body. Before you hear that tale, there is a bit of spooky housekeeping that I need to do first. Necrogamy, which is also known as a ghost marriage, is a marriage where at least one of the participating members is deceased. France is one of the very few countries in the world that this is legal, according to Article 171 of their Civil Code. This became recognized as law in 1804 to allow for marriage to fallen soldiers, and it was considered to be a necessary practice during and after World War I. It was done mostly to grant legitimacy to children whose fathers lost their lives in action before they were able to legally marry the mother of their children. The present form of this law was implemented in 1959 after the breaking of the Malpasset Dam. This disaster took the lives of 423 individuals, and one of these was a man named Andre Capra. During this event, Andre lost his life, leaving behind his fiancée Irene. Irene was pregnant when she lost her love, and she sent France's president, Charles de Gaulle, a petition asking to marry Andre after his death. Seeing that the press was reporting this in Irene's favor, the National Assembly quickly passed a law that allowed the president to personally give licenses for these type of marriages as long as certain requirements were met. One of these was that consent from the deceased is needed. So how does one get that? There must be tangible proof that already exists that the couple intended to marry. This could include things like having previously made arrangements or sending out wedding invitations. So when approved, ghost marriages apply retroactively back to the day that the deceased fiancé died. They also do not allow for the living spouse to receive any of their deceased partner's property or money. In fact, legally, there is no matrimonial property. So why do people do this? Well, after this marriage, the living spouse is considered to be a widow or a widower. This allows for the surviving spouse to join the family of their deceased partner, and for many, this is something they need to help them grieve. But there is a slight financial advantage at times. The widow or widower can receive their partner's pension and is now entitled to life insurance benefits. But France is not the only country to have ghost marriages. For example, in Nazi Germany, it was customary to have fallen soldiers to be married to their pregnant fiancés to make their children not out of wedlock and for them to gain widow's benefits. In South Africa in 2004, a man murdered his fiancée and then himself after an argument. Both families decided that they wanted to remember them as a happy couple and to marry their families together. So the murder victim was married to her killer. In Korea, it used to be customary for people to marry the soul of their fiancé that passed away before their wedding day. The living spouse would then stay celibate for the rest of their lives, even though this marriage was no way legally binding. The idea of a corpse bride or groom is actually way more common than you all think. After all, filmmaker Tim Burton banked on that when he made the 2005 animated film Corpse Bride. Did you all know that this movie is based on a Jewish folktale from the 16th century? In the original version of the story, Rabbi Luria, for some strange reason, was joking around with a wedding ring and marriage vows in a forest. He decided to place the wedding ring on a tree branch when all of a sudden he discovers the branch was the corpse of a dead woman who rose from her grave. She started to shriek and declared that she was now the rabbi's wife, which was not what he wanted at all. So, after calming her down a bit, the rabbi decided to take his corpse bride to the rabbinic court to ask for basically what we know today as an annulment. After all, as the rabbi told the court, he couldn't be married to a dead chick, especially since he didn't consent to this. So the court sided with the rabbi, and the wailing corpse bride collapsed into a pile of bones. Now, you're probably all thinking that the idea of a guy accidentally marrying a dead body, getting some sort of mystical divorce, and the corpse collapsing into a pile of bones is quite silly. But as we mentioned before, there is a bridal shop in Mexico that really hopes that their window display doesn't do the same thing. The thing is, my spooky friends, embalmed bodies are not unheard of as some sort of weird tourist attraction. In the Vatican, for example, they have the bodies of a couple popes on display, and Moscow still has the body of one of their former leaders out for public viewing. But this is not what is happening at the bridal shop that we mentioned. In this shop's window is a tourist attraction that many have wondered about for years. Is it a very realistic looking mannequin, or is it a body that's being used like one? This debate started in 1930 when an eerily lifelike mannequin now known as La Pasculita moved into this shop's window. Now, looking at pictures of her, she definitely appears to be more lifelike than most of today's store mannequins. Her face appears very expressive, even with her stiff and glassy-eyed gaze. She is wearing heavy eye makeup, lipstick, and is wearing thick lashes. But when you take a closer look, that's when you notice that her hands have lifelike detail and her legs are covered with varicose veins. She is wearing an elaborate wedding dress, and the first thing that people noticed when she first was placed in the shop's front window was how she had a striking resemblance to the daughter of the shop's original owner, Pascuala Esparza. On March 25, 1930, Pascuala's bridal shop opened that day to show their brand new mannequin that was wearing a bridal gown from their spring collection. After seeing this mannequin, the locals started to talk. They concluded that this mannequin was actually the embalmed body of Pascuala's daughter, who had died recently on her wedding day. She was bitten by a black widow spider and had succumbed to its poison. Due to her daughter was unable to be married while she was alive, they came to the conclusion that Pascuala decided to have her married in death. So immediately the townsfolk told the grieving mother that what she was doing was wrong. Pascuala told them all that the mannequin was not her dead daughter, and she did not have her embalmed and put her in the front window of her store. But no one believed her, since she would refuse to show them any proof that the mannequin was actually a mannequin. As of this recording, this mannequin has been on display for 93 years, and it still stands out today. Not just because of the legends behind it, but because of its unusual characteristics. The hands look shockingly real. They have wrinkles, veins, and worn-down nails. The skin is a strange color, and it has rosy cheeks, glassy eyes, and what appears to be naturally flowing long hair. Many customers report that this mannequin's eyes follow them as they walk through the store, and others claim that when they look at her, she's in one position, but when they turn to look again, the mannequin moved to a different position. So what do the professionals say? Is this real, or is it a real fake? Funeral directors, morticians, and further experts have made compelling arguments for both sides of this debate. However, many agree that this bridal mannequin is just that, a mannequin. They say that for a corpse to stay in perfect condition, the environment must be controlled. The environment within the bridal shop is not. They also say that embalming must be done perfectly, and the constant maintenance that must be done, especially since this mannequin is constantly being handled for dress changes, it would be too much. But even with all of this, people still believe that this is no mannequin. Many note that the drying and receding skin on her hands is proof that what is in that window is actually a human body. But no matter what side of this debate that you're on, La Pasculita is a tourist attraction and a legend that would be told for years to come. Thank you all for joining me to hear some dark tales of corpse brides. If you want to get spooky with us, subscribe to our podcast today on Spotify, Spreaker, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. To get even more spooky content, join us on Facebook at Horrifying History, on Instagram and Threads at Horrifying_History, or on Twitter at HorrifyingHist1.
Welcome back, creeps. I hope you enjoyed the strange story of La Pasculita, the real corpse bride. So let's talk about Carl Tanzler. What a crazy ride of a story this one is. So creeps, grab a cup of coffee. Let's talk about this one. Marina Elena Milagro De Hoyos, more commonly referred to as Elena. She was the middle-born child of a Cuban-American family in Key West, Florida. For what we could find, she led a normal life as a teenager in the 20s. She was a devout Catholic and loved Rudolph Valentino. I love Rudolph Valentino, as I did a story about his ring, but he was quite the looker. She liked to cook for family and friends. She would dance at the social club La Brisa. And she was actually looking forward to the kind of technical things that were coming in the future in the 30s. I know, it was in the 1930s. We're not that crazy, but still. She was extremely beautiful, I think. You look at the picture and she just has this beautiful hair, skin, that like the features. But she was shy, but an accomplished singer. To the point where tourists actually would come and ask for her picture. Can you imagine that feeling? Like it's almost that local famous, like you're not like Brad Pitt level, but any level of being famous feels good. Now what's sad is Elena was very young, and her tragedies started very soon. She was married. However, she did miscarry a child, and gradually she just fell ill with this cough. Now, when I was reading the initial story, my brain went, uh-oh, coughing. Like you think of it, and the first thing was like TB. What was going on at that time? Tuberculosis was just nasty and rampant. But what's crazy is her family actually assumed that the illness was due to like some sort of postpartum loss of her child, depression, sickness type of situation. But that cough was not going anywhere. As I'm sure many people listening know that tuberculosis is a death sentence. We hadn't made the advances. We haven't figured out what's going on there and how to take care of it. And it was one of the most prominent causes of death at that time. Now, Elena's father worked in a cigar factory where I guess this TB was just spreading like crazy. And to make matters worse, her husband left for Miami, just leaving Elena alone with her illness. What a butthead, right? Now the crazy date, April 22nd, 1930. This would be the day. She had been referred to this Marine hospital for testing, but this was the day where she met, got the radiology, appointment with Carl Tanzler. To many, Tanzler was just an eccentric person, kind of that strange, just different guy. He kind of kept to himself, but he also carried himself with like a high over sense of importance. He He was known, he would stroll around town, I guess I was reading about this, with a cane and show off his wristwatches. And he claimed that these watches were commissioned to him by the Tsar of Russia. Where is he getting this? The Tsar of Russia gave him watches. If the Tsar of Russia is giving you watches, why are you a radiologist in some small marine hospital? That initially made no sense to me. He claimed to have 9 university degrees. 9. And self-titled himself as Count von Kossel, taking the name of some alleged ancestor family. However, later, his wife, remember that wife, Doris Schaefer, and other family members would state that he is not from royal lineage whatsoever, and that he just created this title himself. So let's talk about these degrees. So the medical degrees, the licenses, and medals bestowed upon him were all proven to be forged. You're not on a good trail here, Carl. Though he considered, people could say that he was well read on medicine, radiology, that X-ray technology. But also on the side of it, aside from his education, he was not short on money. He had been receiving a pension from the military for his involvement in World War I. Now, nobody really was able to unmask the extent, of kind of where he was during World War I, but apparently he had been kept in Australia as a POW for a while. So I have a feeling that's where he and why he was receiving that pension. Now, he would publish an account of that period of time in a digest discussing that. Now, the digest, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but I'm going to try it. I wrote it down, is the Rosicrucian Digest, and that was from 1947 when he published that. Now, when I'm telling all these histories, you have to remember, Elena was only 20 years old, so she doesn't have this long, extended history of all these crazy things that she's done, where Mr. Carl over here, he's 53. Even before these two met, he just has more life in general, and judging by what I found, it's a very colorful one. He has a lot going on. So, kind of that brief kind of interaction, and also, I forgot to mention, he's also an immigrant. So we have all these things floating around, kind of a little back history on these two. Now, once she's officially diagnosed with TB, he kind of takes it upon himself to do whatever he can to cure her. Now, why is he so obsessed with, to cure her? It's not like he's not a doctor. We know that. And he doesn't really have any investment in this person. Not like he's known her. It's not a child. But it gets wild. So Carl had been plagued, apparently, by visions of a beautiful, dark-haired woman who was destined to be the love of his life. Now, unfortunately for her, when Carl said, "Oh my God, this is literally the woman that's been in my dreams," Carl assumed this was the apparition in human form. So once she fell ill, he just became obsessed, absolutely obsessed. He put it upon himself and offered services free of charge. Because remember, he's getting dough from someplace else. So, he can do whatever he wants. Now, Elena's family did not have, guaranteed funds coming in and were considered poor. Concoctions and tonics that were made out of literal gold were made by Tanzler. But a side point is also he would customize these shock treatments by connecting electrodes to her body via these transformers, and then give her also medicinal wines. Now, to make matters even more nuts, he kept a wingless airplane on the hospital grounds that he would deem Countess Elena. This would be his lab, and claim that they would someday fly away together. Now, a side crazy note is that he claimed this plane, remember, there's no wings, he claimed this plane would be amphibious and that it would sail on water as well as fly. He made countless proposals of marriage towards Elena. And Elena's mother protested and just at one point kicked Tanzler out of the family home. So we know that kind of historically, Elena did not return those feelings whatsoever. She repeatedly kind of said, hey, you're too old for me. And additionally, she was not even divorced from her other husband who had, just bailed and went to Miami. So there's a lot going on. But that did not deter him. And what's crazy is that, when he proposed the marriage, we had like an actual quote was that, quote, "You are too old. Why, you are old enough to be my grandfather. What's more, I do not love you." And apparently he became so persistent that they asked him just to stay away from the house after that. So what's crazy at this time, that things like restraining orders, it wasn't even a concept yet, that's something that you could actually maintain. So it became so crazy that they actually had to go to a new residence. Yet again, Tanzler was completely undeterred. He went every single night to every neighbor that he could find until someone gave up the location. I would like to know who gave up that location, because I don't think they realized exactly what was going to happen. This guy was nutso-butso. Now, Elena was getting more ill. And we know TB is not good, right? So they considered the fact that she's just so ill. They gave in. They're like, fine, if you can cure her, then that's fine. So he started with more of these medical treatments, and they were accepted. The medical treatments were, but they would have to kind of tiptoe around these continued marriage proposals. He did not quit. And then remember, he has a wife. We talked about that earlier. So he has a wife. She's technically still married to the deadbeat that left her. And he has 2 kids. And yet he's trying to propose to Miss Elena. And to make matters even worse, one of his children even died from diphtheria while all this shenanigans was happening. Died. Nothing was done. He's like, okay, whatevs. I got another one. Like, are you serious? It's crazy. But October 25th, 1931, there was no more that Carl could do. She died at the age of 21. And in his memoir, he recalls that he was absolutely furious that they did not tell him sooner. Now, this is where the first twist of information started. Now, I had heard of this story of Carl Tanzler prior to this, but I started to dig deep, and more information came out, I'd say in a more modern day, about what was happening here. So Tanzler signed the cause on Elena's death certificate as expiration from a series of violent seizures clinically associated with dormant epilepsy. I'm sorry, what? It was not TB. That's not what he wrote on the death certificate. And why was she having violent seizures or epilepsy when that was never noted before? This was the first big twist. So there's 2 parts to this crazy story. One, all of the crazy stuff that he does to her following the death and keeping her. We'll get to that. And then the other part is, but what really happened? So there's so much going on. We're gonna go into the detail of each, though. Shortly after, Elena passed, Tanzler apparently talked to the family and convinced them into giving him a residence in her room, paying them a fee of $20 a month. Now, in today's money, that's about $345 to stay in her room. So to them, that was a lot of money. Not only that, he built and then interred Elena in an elaborate mausoleum. He would visit every night for 2 years, constantly, buying gifts, and he even installed a telephone. Now remember, at the time of Elena's death, she was still married, and her last name was Mesa. The groom's name was Mesa. However, that was not engraved on the tombstone. On the bottom corner, it's inscribed CT.D.Consul. And what this stands for is Countess Damsel, and then his name. It's not an actual title, but again, it was self-created by Tanzler to further bind them together. Now, another note to this mausoleum is that Mr. Carl was the only person with a key. because he paid for it. He is the only person with a key. After 2 years of visiting Elena nightly, generally kind of creeping everybody out that he was just obsessed with this, he couldn't take it anymore. He just was not satisfied with these nightly visits. He needed more quality time, and his dream girl was decaying. So he places Elena's decaying corpse. So if anybody has been around that, it does not smell good, in a toy wagon and transported it to the makeshift lab, and then using plaster of Paris, wires, mortician wax, and glass eyes, Tanzler brought Elena, quote, back to life and proceeded to take her to his home, where the pair shared a marital bed. Now, for those youngsters listening, you won't know what that means. But let me give you a description of something. Following all this shenanigans, the coroners, when Elena was then taken away, had discovered that among all of the kind of multiple body parts that he had reconstructed, he had inserted a paper tube inside of her to serve as a makeshift vagina. Now, over the years, Tanzler kind of kept her around and alive, I use that term loosely, while using wire hangers to preserve her frame. He would stuff her abdominal cavity with rags, routinely would reapply wax to her face. He would replace the dying scalp with real hair that he somehow got from the family. I don't know why they gave it to him. And was constantly dousing her in disinfectants and oils to kind of mask the rotting smell of her body. Now, having given you that kind of brief description of what's going on there, I would like to read you an insert from The Secret of Elena's Tomb by Karl Tanzler von Kossel, his memoir. It revealed that the leaks were caused by a very small insect larva of the gnat type, a bloodsucker, which had drilled several pinholes through those protective walls in order to feed on plasma. So my good lady had to take a bath of chinosol for a few hours as so to remove any hiding larvae. This also contracted the perforations. After being dried with alcohol and eau de cologne, those pinholes had to be sealed up. Then I discovered that I was all out of silk. My supply had become depleted, and here Elena came to my rescue by saying to me, "Take my bridal dress. It's soiled anyhow." I answered, "That's a good idea, darling. I will take your bridal dress and cut out the soiled parts, and there will still be plenty silk left, and I will buy a new one for you tomorrow." That should paint a picture of exactly what's happening to her body. So this sort of relationship went on for 7 years. Everything was going fantastic, according to Karl, until people started asking questions. The combination of him routinely buying women's clothing, his absence from the mausoleum where she's supposed to be, even though everyone knew that he was obsessed with her, and then a local boy's sighting of him through a window dancing with what appeared to be a giant doll. Fast forward to 1940 in October, Elena's sister confronts Tanzler at his home. He kind of allowed her inside, and then to her absolute horror, she was met with what appeared to be a wax dummy of her sister. If only, right? We all know, we're following the story, we know that this is not a wax dummy. Elena's sister called the authorities. They seized the doll, and then they discovered that it was actually Elena's rotting corpse. Now, a Bienvenido Perez, in an interview for Men True Adventure magazine, would reveal a potential much darker intention on Tanzler's part. Quote, "Von Kossel had told me once, 'I have spent my whole life. I have roamed the earth searching for Elena. 50 years ago, she appeared to me in a vision, and she promised then to be my bride. Now I've found her, and I'll kill her if necessary to fulfill my destiny.'" So is it possible that he actually murdered This poor Elena? Now, usually with stories this old, you don't get new information, right? It just kind of disappears. But every now and then, these little stories pop up, and it makes the story just come to life again. I probably shouldn't say come to life, because there's new information. So somebody was renovating a cottage in Key West, and then when they went to tear it down, the wall, they found a note. And it seemed to be that someone was admitting to murder. The page of the journal read clearly, quote, "She died because I gave this to her mercifully. I mixed the root of wolfsbane with aconite dilute. It was palatable, and my loved one departed this miserable world on October 25th, 1931. Suffer no more, sweet Elena. I have sent you to the angels with my golden elixir." So what are these chemicals that they talk about? Aconite is a plant native to Northern Asia and Europe, and it has two associated names, monk's hood and wolfsbane. And they come from the appearance and its use, by shepherds to kill wolves. In a case report of an overdose of this drug, it was noted that the patient at one point suffered a seizure much like Michael Felder notes the police log where Elena experienced violent convulsive seizures before her death. So this Michael Felder goes on to describe how the demolition worker, of this cottage, the supervisor found bottles full of golden elixir fallen from the collapsed wall of Tanzler's former residence. Now, the former police logs, from this period, which described the seizure, Tanzler's threat to Elena's father, and testimonies from people in her neighborhood the week before Elena's death, that he had persuaded her to swallow double doses of this elixir. So what did this elixir contain? It was 70% distilled water, 20% gold shavings, fruit flavoring, and just enough deadly poison to effect a slow death. And you also got to remember, her body was not autopsied when she died. He took it. He started the process and started doing his thing to it, which is just another way of covering this whole thing up. The Count, he's in love, right? The Tanzler, he's in love. He's a much older man in love with a much, much younger woman who wants absolutely nothing to do with him, right? She's not dying fast enough. Sure, the TB might have taken her, but he's got this plan in his head to be with her after she's dead, forever. So what does he do? He poisons her, which is crazy because usually poisoning is kind of a women's game, but here you go. He poisons her, and he kills her quicker so that he can have her for his own. Ultimately, Tanzler was arrested and stood trial for wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. The trial was a media sensation, as expected, and what's crazy is they actually put her body on display, which I think is a bad move, but that's okay. I can't change that. They essentially supported, the media, which was crazy, and even the women supported Tanzler, finding him just as an eccentric romantic. Like, read his memoir. He's not just some eccentric romantic. He did some crazy things. And while on the stand, he claimed that he had planned to use the airship to take Hoyos high into the stratosphere so that radiation from outer space could penetrate Elena's tissues and restore her to her somnolent form. But what's even more nuts is Tanzler was eventually cleared, since the statute of limitations of his crime had expired. And the kicker? Carl Tanzler actually asked for Elena's body back after the trial. Of course, it was denied. He lived the rest of his days without any further incident, although apparently with a life-size effigy made from Elena's death mask as a companion. In 1952, Tanzler was found dead by police on the floor of his home next to a wax replica of Elena. All of Elena's immediate family had also passed away from tuberculosis at this point. We can all hope that poor Elena is now at peace and rests in an unknown location so that she can be undisturbed and allowed peace. Before we leave you creeps today, just want to thank you guys for coming on over and checking out this very cool collaboration of the tale of two corpse brides. And Miss Brenda, absolutely a thrill to have you here on Creepy Confidential to enjoy the research of this crazy story of La Pasculita and Carl Tanzler. It's just crazy to think that there really are the tales of two corpse brides. I will leave the details for Miss Brenda of Horrifying History. I will leave the details for her podcast here in the description. Please feel free to go over, check out some of those episodes. If you enjoy the amount of research and historical information similar to here at Creepy Confidential, you will also love Horrifying History. Really, really fun podcast. So creeps, be safe this Halloween season. We hope to see you guys on the live stream that's coming up here, Creepy Confidential After Dark, where there's no script, no rules, and we get as creepy as we want to. Miss Brenda will be here on the 24th, which is probably when you guys might be listening to this, live over on our YouTube channel. Let's come talk about the episode, talk about our research. It would be fun to have you guys with us. So creeps, until next time, thanks for checking out Creepy Confidential.